So hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I am James Rosica.
And I am Andres Lorente. And each week on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two films, usually one old and one new, and we try to make some comparisons and contrasts between the two. This week we watched Elvis, the brand new Baz Luhrmann extravaganza 2022.
Extravaganza is the word.
Is that the word? Yeah. We'll go into that for sure. And we also watched a film 95 years older than Elvis, and that is the original jazz singer featuring Al Jolson, and that film was made in 1927. And it's actually considered the first sort of sound film, or the first film that has location sound. Not a lot of it, but yeah.
It's the first feature. Apparently there were short films with sync sound before this, but the first feature to have sync sound. And you're right, it's only a couple of minutes of sync sound, but this is what broke the mold, exactly.
And a little bit that I'd read about it was that the a lot of the sync sound was actually improvised dialogue. The sync sound, I think, is for a few of the songs for sure, but then there are a couple of dialogue scenes, and it looked like some of it was improvised right there, which is interesting.
This is the first movie ever where they had, the audience would hear the script and they went off script.
Exactly.
what a terrible precedent to set. Right, we'll start with Elvis anyway.
Yeah.
Tell me the story.
Oh, I will. I'll say that on sheer length, this is more than a 3-act film in my mind. So I sort of forced it into. I was craving structure, so I was trying to use this cheat sheet I have to get it into structure so that I could review it. It clocks in at about 2 hours, 45 minutes. It's a long film. It's a big film. So in some ways, it kind of feels like two different films. The first 30 or 45 minutes, I wasn't really looking at my watch, but there's this big exposition and story building phase that kind of comprises the first act, but it also is it's very different in character from the rest of the film. The rest of the film feels more cinema-like. This has got lots of split-screen stuff going on. He's shooting all sorts of images. There's the comic book sequence at one point, fireworks going off on screen, all sorts of graphics. So it feels very different from the rest of the film once it gets cruising. This is an $80 million film shot in Australia and got Tom Hanks and his wife sick, I believe.
Oh, right.
I can imagine working with Baz Luhrmann might make some actors sick, but someone is fine.
Was this their COVID picture then?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So
right now I remember. Yeah,
it was big news, March 2020. That I don't know. He tweeted. I don't tweet, but he was tweeting that they were stranded in Australia. And then I thought backwards, and I realized, when I saw that the film was made in Australia, I realized, that's why he was stuck there.
Right.
I got to say that I felt like I was on speed watching this film, which happens with a number of the Luhrmann films, I think.
Exactly. That's his signature style, right?
So I'm also going to try and review it fast and furious, to try and catch that energy. My favorite part of the film was the coffee. And that's totally out of context. I had just gone to buy my espresso beans, and I had them ground in the store, and they were in my backpack right next to me. And they were super aromatic, and I smelled coffee throughout the whole picture, and that made me happy. I was practically snorting coffee, and I had the caffeine buzz, so I was kind of prepared for this film, and I needed it to keep up. But I realized that I was in a happy space just because I could smell this beautiful coffee the whole film, and it was 2 hours, 45 minutes. I'm going to say by rule of thumb, that's an hour too long for sure, but we'll get into it.
There's too much film here.
There's a lot of film here. Story world is the kind of the American South and glam Vegas or Las Vegas in the 1950s to the 1970s for the most part. They move around a little bit. It's definitely a biopic. It's early on, it's exposition heavy. I'll talk about biopics a little bit probably at the end. And just to... at the outset, I'll just say, generally a biopic where you're covering the entire life of a character or subject seems a bit much to me. I wish he'd just sort of focused on a little section of his life or something that we didn't know as well. So it does cover the life of Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. For me, the inciting incident is the wiggly pelvis performance. It's on a radio show in front of a live audience, and boy, women and men seem to be going orgasmic for Elvis once he starts shaking his hips. He's very nervous at first, but this becomes sort of a calling card for him or a touchstone for him. The problem in the film is that this character, Colonel Tom Parker, who's kind of known as the Snowman, he wants Elvis as his product to shop. He wants exclusive rights to this guy. So history tells us, we know a little bit about this story. I knew a little bit about Tom Parker going into it, but very controlling figure as the business manager or the manager of Elvis Presley. So he sort of becomes an antagonist fixture. His past is really sketchy. He's not Dutch. He's not American. Kind of like Tom Hanks in the very role. Definitely not Dutch and not American. The Hanks accent it's disconcerting.
Yes.
And one of my why questions is, there's got to be some actor, a Dutch actor, someone who could do this role a little bit better and capture the accent, because I just never felt like... I think it's problematic because it's sort of a southern U.S. Dutch accent. You're trying to do a lot there, and I think that's really challenging for an actor to do. So Tom Hanks has done a lot of accents. I think some of his weakest work is when he tries to put on accents. So I wasn't too happy about that. And then so by the end of the Act 1 curtain, it's kind of that Colonel Tom Parker has got Elvis in his grip a little bit, but he really wants to get this exclusive agreement. There's this devil tempting on the Ferris wheel kind of moment where Parker has just led Elvis out of this room of mirrors where Elvis can't really see himself or find his way out. Very symbolic, all this. Then Parker takes him into this world of carnival geeks, and he's the snowman. He's going to pull a fast one and sort of pull the rug right under Elvis's feet by tempting him with this life of glamour and success. Real kind of a classic trope, I guess, in the industry where Elvis literally walks out of a room at the end of Act 1 and goes up on the Ferris wheel, and he's being tempted by this devil-like character. So that's the first act. It runs about 45 minutes or 50 minutes. It's long.
It is long, yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
There's a point, not very long after that. Mm-hmm. I also wasn't watching my watch during the film, but it felt like we had quite a lot of story covered already at this point, and not very long after Tom Parker takes over his career. Yeah. There's a lot more hip shaking, and Elvis gets arrested for obscenity.
Perfect, yeah.
And I was kind of thinking, oh, here we go. So this is like this is the middle of the film. This has got to be like the middle of Act 2 now. Yeah. And I checked my watch, and we were like 45 minutes in or something. I'm thinking, oh, wait a second. This is barely a third of the way into the film, but it really feels like this is the big turning point in the kind of the middle of it. So it does feels front loaded and kind of strangely lumpy in shape. I agree.
Yeah. So as I said, it's craving structure and. I'm using some terms here to try and give you an idea of the structure, but it didn't fit really well because I also had the midpoint as sort of the Steve Allen show where Elvis has to be in a tuxedo and tails. He's trying to reinvent himself as like the family Elvis or something like that. Ends up defying the authorities in a sort of a pelvic thrusting laden show at a car. It's in a baseball park or something like that. And that's kind of where there's a big change in how Parker wants to handle him and how Elvis ends up sort of being handled. And there's this mentor and innocent guy kind of theme going on, and you definitely feel like Parker's doing deals with the devil, and he kind of is the devil himself. And that scene is kind of interesting because this is the one moment where Luhrmann gets a little political. It's intercut. The scene where Elvis kind of defies the authorities and goes ahead and performs the way he wants to, is intercut with this southern fascistic rally surrounded by Confederate flags. It's a senator, I think, who's got a problem with Elvis's obscenity, and it's kind of like Luhrmann making a political statement on Trumpism. It seems a little over the top. I mean, everything with Luhrmann is OTT, but I think that was kind of a political moment there. And again, he's probably making this film 2018, 2019. It took him 8 years, I believe, to sort of develop the script and write it. It's his first film since Gatsby, which was 2012. So 10 years between films and 8 years working on this. So it feels like he's hit the sign of the times a little bit with that one moment.
I mean, they do kind of fold a few modern mannerisms in. One of the headlines later on in the film is something like "Elvis is cancelled."
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, so he is definitely trying to playfully engage with a little bit of kind of contemporary chit chat.
I think so.
I mean, and it's cute, and I think it works. It's fine.
Yeah. And I'll come back to that too. I think he's really trying here. Luhrmann is definitely trying here. Act 2 curtain I had basically as Elvis is kind of conscripted into the army. He's going to spend 2 years out of the country. His mother dies, seemingly of heartbreak while he's in the army, but he gets shipped off and she almost immediately her health fails and she dies. That's how it plays in the movie. I looked at the World Wide Web a little bit, and Elvis apparently made it home to see her before she died, but for dramatic purposes, that really feels also like the end of Act 2 because there's a death and all that, but it's so long that this formula doesn't really work very well, I don't think. There's right after that, though, there's the pinch of love. Priscilla, I don't know Priscilla's maiden name, but she who will become Priscilla Presley.
It's Bewley, isn't it? I think is her maiden name.
Yeah. She enters the scene, and Elvis falls in love. He's never met anyone like her, and so now we have a sort of a new angle. But there's more death too. Like Martin Luther King dies. Martin Luther King Jr. dies. 1968, obviously, and really about a month later, maybe 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy also dies.
Yeah.
And Elvis seems to take those very heavily in this film. So there's the turmoil of the 60s is sort of catching up with Elvis too. And this is sort of beyond his big years. We're really probably late 50s and early 60s. Luhrmann sort of covers really quickly the whole film career.
Yes, it's a montage, isn't it? This enormous kind of segment of Elvis's life.
Yeah.
And the bit which a lot of people would say is the thing that kind of ruined him really, that he put all his energy into movies when he should have been making records, and that's just kind of presented as a quick montage, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's kind of one of my sort of complaints about the film. Perhaps we'll come back to that after the précis, but it's strange what things he chooses to spend time on, what things he doesn't.
Yeah, and it's sort of meta because he's doing these montages of films and montages and just kind of covering a lot of ground very quickly. And I think we know that he did act, but it's quite a bit. He ultimately ends up spending more time on this Christmas special that Tom Parker has signed him on for, and I liked some of the scenes in there. It was kind of interesting to see how the scene goes about. Elvis wants to sort of reclaim the rock mantle, and he goes to these guys who've worked with the Rolling Stones and others, and sort of co-opts Parker's Christmas story, takes all the Christmas out of it. And it's actually known as one of his great performances where he got the old band back together and some guests, and they did sort of a really stripped down studio show where he's really just playing guitar and singing with them. And so Elvis is sort of rediscovering himself, but then there's this new temptation later when Tom Parker seems to be in debt to some evil casino owners because he's gambling so much that he sort of has to bring Elvis out to Las Vegas to pay off his debt. So he signs Elvis onto this long-term contract in Las Vegas at a hotel or a casino. And Parker's got his talons in Elvis at this point, and he's ultimately using fear of death threats against Elvis to keep him like isolated in Las Vegas when Elvis is actually newly sort of aspirationally wants to go to Europe. He wants to go around the States, but he ends up sort of just getting stuck in Las Vegas for the rest of his career. And that's where he sort of disassociates. He hangs out in his hotel room. He's doing drugs. He declines into that bloated and blathering lounge entertainer that we kind of remember him as. And at the same time, we're sort of learning that Parker, he was never a colonel, and he's unscrupulous, and he's a gambling addict, and he owes a lot of money around town, and he's using Elvis basically to pay his way through. Yeah. So it kind of ends around there. It's sad. Elvis's father, who was his business manager, had basically done a very bad job with the money, and Parker was stealing them from them all along. So it looks like Elvis is going to get out of the arrangement and go do what he wants to do, but he owes Colonel Tom Parker over $8 million from everything from like small purchases at supermarkets in the 1950s all the way up until whatever he was doing in the 1970s. And so it actually gets him stuck in Las Vegas, and then he eventually dies.
And it slightly glosses over those, because I was expecting almost any any Elvis biopic to sort of linger on those those final days of the final meal, and it glosses all over all that, doesn't it? So we get a little bit of the bloated Elvis at the end, but he's allowed a little bit of dignity as he sails off into the sunset.
So that's kind of the film,
yeah. I got to the end of this film and I was asking myself, one of those top 3 classic screenwriting questions. I was asking myself, whose story is this film?
Yeah.
Because I came out thinking, well, it's not really Elvis's story.
Nope.
Insofar as, like we said with the movie career, a lot of the important parts of his story are roughly skipped over in a montage, aren't they? The movies, the tours, and even that part in his life between him, as a sort of a young boy, as a schoolboy, being inspired by gospel singers, and then him, starting up a band and starting out on the circuit before he's discovered by Tom Parker. Even that bit kind of doesn't really appear on screen, and that those kind of formative sort of early years in the band were actually the bits that I would be most interested in. So it feels like we don't see an awful lot of Elvis that we don't already know about Elvis. And so you become away thinking, well, is it Colonel Tom's story? But it's not really Colonel Tom's story either. No. A lot of the things that we learned about him, we are told rather than we are shown. Mm-hmm. So we're told that he's, a kind of a Dutch man with no passport and a shady history and was never a colonel. But actually, we don't really see anything about what Tom Parker's story is. Yep. I came away thinking, if the story belongs to anyone in this movie, the story is the story of the music. Mm-hmm. So the music is born like in Memphis on Beale Street, and then the music kind of grows and evolves. And then and the music kind of outgrows the people who sang it even. So it's like, it feels like it's the biopic of the music of Elvis rather than of Elvis or the people who are with him.
That's a generous take, I think. That's
I'm a kind critic.
But I want to combine it, and I'll talk more about the music, and I think obviously we're doing 2 music films here, but I do know the answer to the question of whose film it is. It is Baz Luhrmann's film.
Oh, yes.
And I have a lot to say about that because I really dislike most of his work, and I really dislike his style. And in this film, and I think in many of his films, he just can't get out of his own way long enough to tell a good story, and it's all smoke and mirrors. And I guess there's a connection to Tom Parker being all about smoke and mirrors, but he cannot. It's
beautifully colourful, voluminous smoke, isn't it? And it's a beautifully decorated mirror.
Yeah, I mean, he plans his images very in a very detailed fashion, but he doesn't get away from them long enough to actually tell the story. So, for me, this film, to a certain extent, because it also combines the story of Las Vegas, the emergence and evolution of Las Vegas. This film sort of represents the end of civilization for me. I mean, I just think it's so superficial, and it doesn't inform us very much. It gives us a little idea about what a bastard Tom Parker was, but you're spot on in saying that it's not enough about Tom Parker to really give us much information about him either. And it's all sort of it's circumspect, I guess. I mean, there's nothing really definite about it. There's very little factual in it, and when we talk about biopics, I think you'll see that I think the veracity is important, but to get around that and tell a good story, sometimes you make things up or exaggerates them. And I say it's the end of civilization. I'm exaggerating because Baz Luhrmann always exaggerates, and I think he's the snowman here, too. That's the other thing, is that I think there's this fear of getting exposed as someone who can't really tell stories, but I can do all this picture shit and from videos and commercials, right? So it ends up being very surface, and he's just always struck me as he was probably a great video director, great commercial director. I did like a couple early films. I thought Strictly Ballroom was a good film. Yeah. I kind of liked Romeo and Juliet too. I thought it was pretty.
I really enjoy Romeo plus Juliet. Yeah, I think it's a lovely film. I enjoy watching that again.
Yeah, but ultimately, all the films are much more about style than material. And I would love to see him make something small again, like a Strictly Ballroom. I think that'd be really interesting. And here, I don't know if you saw the credits. He actually sort of has several writing credits. I think he's in there as being part of 2 pairs as well as writing the story, which is just lots of Baz Luhrmann. This film is definitely Baz Luhrmann.
I think there are 4 writers credited in total. I
think it's 5, and he's
Is it
2.
5? Someone came up with the story, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's right, yeah.
I think
did have a look to see who the other writers were, actually. Craig Pearce, I think, is the other top-billed writer, who's worked with Baz on like most of his other pictures, Romeo and Juliet, and he's written this Pistols, the Sex Pistols series for Netflix.
Okay. Oh, that's
and then I think it's Jeremy Donner and Sam Bromwell are the other writers that I wrote down on my list, who are also kind of Luhrmann collaborators.
Yeah. So it's his film. There's no question about it. He's all over it. Made it in Australia, on his home turf and all that. I mean, it's definitely his film. So I don't think it's about Elvis or Tom Parker. For me, it's really about Baz Luhrmann.
But for all the kind of the sparkle and the superficiality, there are some great scenes in this film. But all of the great scenes, all of the scenes that I really loved, obviously, are the music scenes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
And so I think there's like an early scene where the boy Elvis is caught up in like a sort of gospel church service, and he's just kind of vibrating with excitement, with this kind of religious ecstasy. And then his performance in the Christmas special, and his like early live shows with girls sort of screaming at him. These are electric, exciting scenes, skillfully filmed. I don't think no one watching the film wasn't tapping their toes during those scenes.
Yeah. Yep.
I think the music scenes really work.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sometimes, sometimes they're not Elvis performances of the songs. I mean, I think the best ones are where it's like literally an Elvis performance. But Luhrmann does this in a lot of films where he remakes songs with some modern artist, and I don't like that moments. I don't like the way he uses music generally in films. And especially in the first act of this film, he's enslaved to cutting to music. He's always like, if he hears a snare drum, he has to make a cut. So I was, timing shots in the very beginning, and it was 2 seconds at most for most shots, and a lot of them were just on a drum hit. It was just, he's really just a musical cutter, and that's why I think maybe he makes great videos, or he could, but I don't like what he does with music generally in his films. But the note that I had to myself, you said it much better. I said the musical segments are gold.
If only one could cut out about 60 minutes of the drama.
Yeah.
Because all the plot scenes are, I wrote in my little note here that the plot scenes are basically people explaining to each other what happened while we were watching or listening to a song. It's like they're kind of pretty dry and factual.
Yeah. And that, you could say, oh, cut the music scenes, but those are the best scenes, and that would probably bring it down under 2 hours or something. They're certainly closer to 2 hours. There's something on the spectrum about the film. It just feels very enervated a lot, especially the opening 30 minutes. And you get through that 30 or 40 minutes, and then there's finally this dialogue scene where Elvis is in the kitchen with his mother, and it just feels really different. And it's also, the dialogue's not super strong. The acting's not super strong. So it's he's just amping up to this end of the first act, and then all of a sudden the story starts to come through the actors, and it's not very strong in that way. I wonder how well he directs actors and emotions and stories, because it doesn't seem like his strong suit. He doesn't seem terribly interested in that. He's much more interested in just blowing us away with visuals and very, very quick cuts. Let me talk quickly about looks and glances, because we learned so much about looks and glances at film school. There's a lot of storytelling that comes in these very unnatural, just cuts, these close-ups to characters that are supposed to be very heavy and tell us what's going on, but they just don't. You haven't seen the actor much in the scene. All of a sudden, they're giving that look of, this is what I'm supposed to be feeling right now. It just didn't feel organic by any means, and then I thought, well, is it just that he's super efficient? He's giving us the one look that we need at the right time, or is it just awkward? And for me, it just felt more awkward. And I think it's because he sort of insists on a fairly pacey movie at all times, that when he goes to a look and glance, it should be sort of ponderous or telling. It actually just ends up being weird.
The thing it reminds me of, I don't know whether you've seen Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
Right, so the Queen sort of biopic.
Yeah.
And I think in that film, there are a bunch of musical sequences which are outstanding and electric and really exciting.
Yeah.
And I think the story of the film is that it was half made by Bryan Singer, who then was kind of sacked, and it was all kind of pretty kind of tricky.
Yeah.
And I think he had probably shot all these exciting musical sequences, but then hadn't shot all the story bits in between. And they brought in a second director, Dexter Fletcher, who came in. He stepped in, and then the film really looks like he had to, with little time and little money, quickly film a bunch of story scenes that could just fill in the gaps between the musical sequences. And so that film is very, really, really feels like a game of two halves. You have like an exciting music sequence, and then you have a really quite poor, dull soap opera-y scene where people walk in and they explain what their feelings are, and then they walk out again. And this film has a little bit of that feel as well, that you can feel that Baz Luhrmann is really excited by the music scenes, and then forced to add some plot scenes in between to stitch it up, so that it turns out to be a whole feature. I was going to ask you, this is the other classic screenwritery film, what do you think it is really about, this film?
I have that note in my writing here. I said, what's it about? I knew you were going to ask me that.
See, I always ask the same questions. You know what I like.
It's a good one, though. Here's my take, is that as a biopic, I don't think it really has to be about anything. You're just trying to tell someone's life story. But there's a lot about father figures who are failing us in this film. There's stuff about making deals with devils, and that we never really know what we're going to get ourselves into. And then there's some interesting race stuff in this film, too, because Elvis is this sort of fluid character. He's a white man who moves kind of effortlessly between white and black music and white and black culture and friendships and relationships at a time when racism is like super strong. And, even though we're 100 years beyond the end of slavery. And that kind of connects to the jazz singer, too, in a weird way, I think. But I'm working hard. There's not a whole lot of that. But it did feel like he's an integrated character, and there's all this potential of him. He's so moved by Martin Luther King's death and Kennedy's death. He's about to get political. So I think this film is, to a certain extent, about just potential gone awry or potential never fully satisfied. Because Elvis, he's got some great music. And then I think Las Vegas sort of just destroys him as a person and as a musician, even though it's a comfortable life. And he wanted to take chances based on what I'm learning in this film. So for me, it's mostly about that. I think it's just a potential that just never was fully realized.
I wrote here my little paragraph, themes. I think the theme of the movie, if I'm going to summarize it, is keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Because that feels like this is what they do, or at least be careful who you trust.
Yeah. And
because Elvis, for all his talents, seems to have been a bit of a Reuben, an easy mark for Colonel Tom.
Yeah.
Which is and that's a story that we've heard before and we'll hear again as well.
Two really potent lines of dialogue that I think also help us a little bit are there's this Captain Marvel reference that Tom Parker sort of feeds back to Elvis after he said it early on in the film. It says, "The rock of eternity is forever just beyond our reach." Comes at a big moment. And then Elvis is sort of pondering. He's kind of bloated on drugs in the back of a limousine. There's stuff flying around him. And he says, "A bird that finally lands only when it dies." He's talking about that. So I think, those were like theme lines of dialogue. But as I said before, as a biopic, it doesn't really need to be about anything, I don't think. There are certainly other biopics just kind of cover the life, and there's a built-in audience, so you just make the film. People will go and see it. We know most of the stories of people's lives if we're fans, so the ones that tell an entire life, especially if the veracity is not there, it's just hard for me to swallow because I don't need to see their whole life. So I think if you can really focus on one singular incident that changed their life, I think that's much more interesting for me. Otherwise, I'd rather see a documentary where I'm really learning something and seeing real footage of the artist. So you're kind of limited to a certain extent by truth. That's the thing about biopics and here everyone's going to play fast and loose with the facts in a biopic, but you can't just make anything up. You've got to have some
make it all up. We do get some documentary footage right at the end, don't we? We get some real footage of the older Presley just at the end of the film. Yeah. And I must say, although Austin Butler does a great job in this film, he does a great job, but the charisma of the real Elvis. Completely outshines him in those last kind of 2 minutes when the real Elvis is on screen.
And that's not a healthy Elvis either. He's at like 60%. So, and I think, Austin Butler was great. And And it was this kind of thing where at times they took some bad lines and kind of a bad script and made some good performances of it. Tom Hanks is just kind of weird. I mean, it's not like he does a bad job or anything, but it's just so weird that's all I could write. Tom Hanks is weird. Austin Butler's great.
It's not an obvious role for him, but then good for him for trying something new.
Definitely.
I tell you what movie this of all the movies I was trying to compare it to, I tell you what it most reminds me of, or what I feel this movie most resembles, is Amadeus. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, years ago. Yeah.
Which is also about someone who is sort of mediocre but controlling, who kind of destroys the talent of a younger, kind of more talented musician.
Good pickup.
Okay, so I enjoyed Elvis. I think, for all its faults, I didn't regret the time I spent watching it. It's good fun. Yeah. So that's one film which is all about a white man making money off black people's music. Uh-huh. Let's have a quick break, and then we will come back and talk about another film about a white man making money out of black people's music, and we'll talk about the jazz singer. See you in a minute.
Dr. Ezeka.
Yes.
You may not know this, but I once struggled with some localized paralysis.
No. Really?
Yes.
That's terrible.
It was in the buttocks, which I believe in England you pronounce buttocks.
Buttocks, that's correct. That's the medical term, yes.
The thing about the buttocks that many people may not understand is that they are largely comprised of the gluteus maximus, which I believe comes from the Latin for greatest or largest muscle. Is that correct?
Yes.
But they're also attached to the legs. So because of my buttocks paralysis, I couldn't walk for some time.
Oh, dear.
I called my doctor, Kristen. That's not her real name. And she promptly said, "Why are you calling me? You get your 15-minute visit once a year. Stop calling me." I said, "Dr. Dagwood. That's not her real surname."
That's not her name.
I said, "Doctor, I think I'm temporarily paralyzed. What can I do?" And then she said, and in case you haven't guessed, I'm actually reenacting a fictional conversation right here.
So this didn't really actually happen?
No, absolutely not. This is a fake advertisement. For our listeners who are begging for advertisements, places to spend their money, this is fake. Haven't you heard of Paralystop? I hadn't. But I'm so glad I called my doctor, although she is not glad that I called her. Paralystop is an OTC, or over-the-counter medication. Do you say that in England, over-the-counter?
You do. Yeah, we do. We do.
And then do you shorthand with OTC?
No, we don't.
Okay.
No, but it's the stuff where it's either so powerful or so embarrassing that you have to speak to somebody face to face. You can't just take it off the shelf and pay for it.
Well, Paralystop is an over-the-counter medication that can provide relief for a number of types of temporarily localized paralysis. It's kind of the opposite of what you do for a living, isn't it, Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely.
You actually paralyze people.
Paralyze people as much as I can.
But this could be an opportunity for you, too. Like, you could temporarily paralyze them, then offer them some Paralystop.
So ask your physician.
Well, yeah, that's coming up. Yeah, that's the next part. While it was a great discovery and a cure for me, Paralystop isn't for everyone. Consult your doctor, but don't call my doctor because she apparently only takes fictional phone consultations. Side effects can include, but aren't limited to, loss of sensation in the extremities, difficulty breathing, stroke, high blood pressure, and temporary paralysis. Go figure.
In which case, you should immediately get your money back.
Exactly. We don't do that. We don't know. We just take money. We don't give it back. If you're in need of relief from temporary paralysis, ask for Paralystop at your pharmacy, grocer, or drug dealer now. Paralystop makes the paralysis stop.
We're back after the ad break. We're going to talk about The Jazz Singer, 1927 film. So The Jazz Singer is at number 90 in the American Film Institute list of greatest American films. The writer, Alfred Cohen, was nominated at the first ever Oscars for the script for this film. Directed by Alan Crosland, written as a script from a play by Samuel Raffleson. This is a seminal film, mostly remembered because it's the first talkie. And, like all movie history, it wasn't actually the first talkie. So there were short films that had sync dialogue or sync music before this. I think sync dialogue was a new thing. And Warner Brothers had come up with a system called Vitaphone, which was basically the soundtrack to the film was stamped onto a 16-inch record, a 16-inch phonograph record. And then the player was coupled to the projector motor so that they would stay in sync. And apparently, the jazz singer, it was technically extremely complicated to project. There were 15 different reels, 15 different discs. And out of all that, basically the film it's like 90 minutes, isn't it? 87 minutes, something like that. It has about 2 minutes of dialogue and 6 songs. And the rest of it is just intertitles like the silent films that have preceded it. But nonetheless, the fact that for the first time ever, people were moving their lips and we heard what they say, this was an absolute sensation. So it made a lot of money for Warner's compared to how much they'd laid out for it. Big hit. It's what we remember as the birth of the talkies. So had you ever seen The Jazz Singer before?
I had not. I think I'd seen the climax performance when he's on stage in dress. We'll talk about that. And then... Neil Diamond starred in a remake in 1980.
Yeah, that was a remake. Like 1980, was it?
Yeah,
something like
maybe
that.
78 even. I saw pieces of it on HBO as a kid, but I didn't really see the whole film.
So, I'd never seen that. I'd never seen the Neil Diamond film. So, a very quick recap of the plot. Yeah. So, 1927, it's set in Lower East Side Manhattan in the Jewish ghetto there. The 13-year-old Jackie Rabinowitz, he's the son of a rabbi, and he sings jazz songs or ragtime songs, like at a local bar, because he loves jazz music. And this kind of scandalizes his Jewish family. His father wants him to become a cantor at the synagogue like he is. So on discovering that Jackie is singing these jazz songs, he gives his son a hiding, and then Jackie runs away, leaving his parents. Mother is heartbroken, and we cut to 10 years later, and Jackie's in showbiz. He's kind of renounced his Jewish heritage. He's called Jack Robin now, and we see him singing a song. He's at this kind of cabaret night, and someone says, "Oh, Jack, come and give us a song." And he gets up on the stage, and the first thing that he says, these are the first words spoken in sync dialogue in any movie, every time, he says, "You ain't heard nothing yet," which apparently was Al Jolson, the actor's catchphrase. He sings "Dirty Hands, Dirty Face," which is a hit song at the time. He's spotted by Mary D., who is a theatre dancer. So she's talent spotted him. He becomes a big star. He gets a Broadway show. He returns back to New York, returns to his parental home. His mother is delighted that Jackie has come home. The father comes home. He has one word of spoken dialogue, which is "stop," when Jackie is playing and singing songs on the family piano for his mother. So he says "stop." The father doesn't want to have anything to do with him, throws him out of the house. The father falls ill. Then Jack has a big show coming up on Broadway, and he cancels the opening night so that he can sub as the cantor at the local synagogue and return to his Jewish roots. And his father in his deathbed has the windows open, and he hears his son singing in the synagogue, and he says to his wife, "Oh, our son has come home," and dies. Yeah. And then some months later, Jack is a big star on Broadway, and he sings that song that we have all seen, "Mammy," to his mother, who is sitting in the front row of the audience. That is the end of the film. That's it. Really simple story, very simple, A to B. It's another music picture. It's all about the music, all about the songs. Controversially, not only is it about somebody who is making money out of ragtime music, which is music of black origin, but in this film, as was the cultural norm, he does it in blackface. And I must say, I found this film fairly flummoxing. I found it pretty difficult to pass. Kind of the whole thing, really. The film is from nearly 100 years ago, and I don't know what you felt. It felt to me like a film from 300 years ago. It felt incredibly distant. On the podcast, we have watched some old movies. And not uncommonly, the good ones we pick still feel modern and contemporary. And this is absolutely the opposite. It feels much older than its 100 years.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah,
it's funny how the character that Al Jolson plays, and the story is kind of based on a short story which was based on the real life of Al Jolson. So the character that he plays, he's 13 at the beginning of the movie and then 23. Al Jolson at the time was 41 when he made the film. And I must say, in the film, he looks 51.
Yeah.
I kind of, unbelievable. And he kind of makes these kind of sort of strange gurning faces and has these, very kind of exaggerated mannerisms. And even kind of like, I find it a little bit difficult to interpret what his facial expressions meant for a lot of the time when he's singing.
Yeah. And there's this thing about like the silent films that I think requires a different kind of acting, and in some ways better acting. It's because you've got to use your body, you've got to use your face a lot more. You don't have dialogue as a tool, really. There's a little in this film, but very, very little. And I think it comes out. This was a play at one point. It feels very stagey. So the acting is always kind of over the top, exaggerated, because they're doing it with their bodies more than their voices. And for that reason, I think it does feel old. It almost feels older than that. So you've brought up a good point. Like it's not just theater; it's almost vaudeville in some way. And even the music, is not what I would call jazz. So I guess in 1927 that was jazz. It felt more like vaudeville, even though they're on stage. It just had that feel to it. So it feels more 1860s than 1920s, and it is. It's 100 years old at this point, or 95 years old. So it was quite. It was quite. Quite astonishing. I think you've got a good point there.
Seeing somebody black up to do their act is, it just seems kind of absurd and shocking and sort of difficult to understand with a modern eye.
Yeah.
But supposedly this was a social norm. I mean, this was a social norm when I was very young. I don't know about when you were growing up. Yeah. In the 70s in the UK, there was a popular Saturday evening television program called The Black and White Minstrel Show, where there would be a bunch of white male singers who would black up and then sing these kind of old-timey songs. Yeah. And even then in the early 70s, this was considered, it's just kind of, it's a traditional, it's a bit of fun, that's all right. It feels like a message from another world. Mm. Apparently, Jolson was, he did a lot for black rights and to give credit to black performers, and he was popular in the black community. Mm. So the way that it looks to us now is very different to the way that it looks now. I was trying to think of an equivalent. If you remade the jazz singer today, it would have to be something like, it would be like a Republican senator's son who goes out and becomes a drill MC. That would be my kind of jazz singer remake. Yeah. There's something about these raggy time songs which are just so shocking and so controversial. Yeah. That if you catch your son singing one of these songs, then you would kick him out of the house forever. Sure. Yeah. And it's difficult to enter the mindset of an age where that was a normal way to behave.
It's I put that scene down as my late surprise of the film, and it's not a surprise at all because we all know that's going to happen in the film, that he's going to paint face and perform. But we beforehand, if you come into this not knowing anything, you have no idea that he's about to do this. And it's not until the dress rehearsal or something like that, like the moment of truth. And there's this very strange moment because it's a guilty moment, but it's kind of the wrong guilt. Like he's betraying one culture while belittling another one, and it's all very matter of fact. Like he's not gonna. At that point, it's not clear that he's gonna sing. Is it called the Kol Nidri? He's not gonna sing in the synagogue. And he's feeling terribly guilty about that. But actually, blackening his face and performing as a completely different style actor, he feels no guilt whatsoever. It's really, really quite striking. And I thought that caught me off guard. And then, like, the other idea is, like, why did people do this in the first place? It just seems such a strange thing to do.
Yeah.
So that's my why question. And I found it confusing. It was, it befuddled. It's a strange thing. The thing that I think could have made it really interesting, and it was obvious to me, was I thought he might go home in blackface to deliver the Kol Nidri in the synagogue in blackface. It just seemed, for me, like it was right there, ready to happen, which would have been really, I think, provocative. And it just I think it would have improved the film, but I'm sure that would have just been completely, unacceptable at that time too. It's something else. It's a piece of history.
It's something else. I was kind of surprised how sexed up the film was as well. That there's a lot of dancing girls in kind of little short shorts and a lot of high kicking.
Well, it's Roaring 20s. It's a pretty...
I had to look it up because this is a pre-Hays Code film, isn't it? Hays Code came in 1934. So it's filmed in 1927.
Yeah.
Was, I suppose, this is kind of Hollywood's decadent phase before the Hays Code tried to clean things up. I had a little look at the Hays Code, and some of the things that it demanded. There could be no crime was unpunished in any film. There must be no miscegenation, no interrace relations, and no sexual perversion. They say a picture must not lower the moral standards of those who see it, including women, children, the lower classes, and susceptible minds.
Wow.
This is which is another kind of ruling that feels like it belongs from sort of 300 years ago as well.
So that comes after this film.
Yeah, so that was 6 years after this film.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like the Roaring 20s, and it has those moments that feel like it. Yeah. And I think you get a pretty good sense of like how conservative and traditional the community there in the Jewish ghetto is compared to him. He's wearing a regular suit by the time he's aged 10 years at the sort of the beginning of the second act of this film. So you get that sense. I think just in terms of like comparing it to the Luhrmann film, there's something just simply beautiful about it though too. It's a lovely black and white shot film. It's they're doing more with lighting and less with bells and whistles, and it definitely is. It's a landmark film in that sense. I can see why it would be, considered a top 100 for the American Film Institute or whatnot. But it has its beauty. But
it does have a beauty. It especially loves faces, doesn't it? This film, which kind of feels ironic when the main character completely disguises their face unrecognizably. But this is a film that loves faces.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of kind of very detailed close-ups. So not just of Jolson, but of his mother, of Mary D, who's this kind of the theatrical dancer. It does love a close-up, and the camera is kind to those actors. It does have a lot of themes in common with the Elvis film.
Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of this whole idea of sort of religiosity and music coming out of religion, and both films are broadly respectful of religion. As the thing that we've already talked about how black culture is used by white people.
Yeah.
But also this idea of the manipulation of artists by their like an agent or a producer. The producer when Jackie, when Al Jolson is threatening to ditch the Hollywood production because his father is ill and he wants to be at his bedside and he wants to go to the synagogue, and the producer tells him, "Oh, you don't do. I had to write this down." He says, "Don't do this. You'll queer yourself on Broadway."
And never get another job, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just somehow it was, and this line was delivered, I think, during the scene where Jolson is putting on blackface makeup, and just like the juxtaposition of using the word queer and then using blackface makeup.
Yeah,
it just really felt like it was almost as if the film was made by aliens who understood that there were some significant words but didn't understand what it was that they signified, just that they needed to be used.
Yeah.
For a 21st century viewer, it's quite hard to pass what's going on. The film does also, I've made some little notes here about the other things it has in common with Elvis. Supremacy of family. So it's another film that really believes in family. And it's largely sort of about the shock of the new, isn't it?
Yes.
Because this kind of these raggy time songs, this jazz singing, it is shockingly new.
Yeah.
And it's it's not something that the older generation are prepared to put up with or try to understand.
Yeah.
That's like an eternal story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's a theme that's quite blatantly spoken to the father. At one point, Jack says, "You're of the old world." It's a title card, and I think that sort of sums it up. And these two films, but even just this film, comparing it to how we live today, definitely show you that we've gone somewhere. It's in 100 years, I would say we've made a lot of progress. Some people would not, perhaps, but you've got these tyrannical father figures in both films that kind of want to keep things close to home or in Las Vegas for whatever reason, and not really embrace change and progress.
Yeah, so we have moved forward, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Some people would say.
I hope we have. God, it's interesting to think that if the remake was made in the late 70s, then there were 50 years between the original Jazz Singer and the Neil Diamond version, and then 45 years between the Neil Diamond version and our era today. Wow. It's kind of strange to think of the Neil Diamond version as a modern remake, when actually, I hope there may well have been more social progress between Neil Diamond's film and today than there was between the original Jazz Singer and the remake.
Yeah. Two other kind of minor connections that I've made to the other film were Shaking Pelvis. In both films, like Al Jolson actually does move around quite a bit at the midsection in some of his pieces. And I thought, why is Elvis getting in trouble 50 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, when Al Jolson's doing it here? And then the other thing was quotes of music. Like Luhrmann does this all the time, where he, as I said, he might take an Elvis song and have some new performer re-record it in some sort of hip way, where you get these little musical statements throughout. And I caught two quotes there, probably a whole lot more, but there's one musical quote of "Give My Regards to Broadway" at one point. And then I think it's when Mary's dancing. There's a Tchaikovsky.
I did pick up on that. Yes.
One. I forget which piece it was, but I definitely caught it. I'm not going to go back and listen to the whole film again because I don't want to. But there were definitely some musical quotes in there, which I thought that's kind of interesting that both directors, 95 years apart, were doing the same thing that way.
Maybe some things have changed and some things have not. Yeah. So, do you think? Would you recommend The Jazz Singer to anybody who was not a scholar of early cinematic milestones?
I don't think I would. No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that I would.
I should probably wait longer and have the pregnant pause, but I'm going to say no.
Nope.
Again, I said there's some beautiful filmmaking in there. I think, so many people now we're so far away from that area that people don't even want to look at a black and white film. As you mentioned earlier, there's not a ton of story. So it's not, it's not that interesting to follow.
I feel strangely guilty suggesting that people should watch Baz Luhrmann's Elvis in preference to number 90 on the American film industry's list of the greatest American films of all time.
Better you than me.
Shall I hand in my critic's badge at the door? Collect your belongings and leave.
Yes, please. I'm not going to defend Baz Luhrmann, never, but as I said before, he's trying very hard. I kind of credit a guy who he just wants to go big. If you're going to spend $80 million, make it a big film. Make it something that states something, I guess, or go home. Go big or go home. So the fact that he put 8 years into it, was doing other stuff all along the line, I'm sure, but he's not making films that often. There's a pretty big spread, so he just wants to do something kind of operatic and large, and that film has already made $280 million, so it's obviously paid for itself. There's a market for it, so good for him. I don't want to begrudge the guy. I don't like his films, but I respect the fact that he puts that much time into it. He's obviously thinking about it. He's definitely trying in that film. He's got a couple political statements, so sure, I would probably join you in recommending it over The Jazz Singer. I mean, that's one film. I mean, I'm not going to say run out and see Elvis right away at the expense of some real classics.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what Baz Luhrmann turns his hand to next.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what the. I mean, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that he will try to remake The Jazz Singer.
No.
I mean, in a way, he almost has with Elvis, actually.
Well, yeah.
They cover enough of the same ground that, he's kind of actually already done it.
Thank you. I was just about to suggest a program title for this podcast. Elvis, the Baz Singer.
Oh.
Elvis, the Baz Singer. You heard it first.
Oh,
here.
man, you are wasted on us. That is far too good.
It's low-hanging fruit, my friend, right there.
I cannot beat that. That's I know when I'm beat. This has been the Two Reel Cinema Club. I've enjoyed seeing these two films in a perverse kind of hit yourself in the face with a frying pan kind of way.
Absolutely. We
will be back next episode with two, I hope, maybe slightly more watchable films. Yeah. Maybe not. That's the excitement of cinema. This has been fun as always, and join us next time. Thanks and goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.